Hi guys, so this is the lecture on homeostasis, and the essential question is, how does the body maintain homeostasis, and what can happen if it fails to do so? So you should be able to answer that question using all of the vocabulary that you see on the right by the end of this lecture. We'll be talking about what homeostasis is and what the end results of it are, and then last of all, what happens when you are not able to maintain homeostasis. Remember that organ systems work together to promote health and well-being of the entire body, which means that a healthy body must be able to do all of these life functions that you see here. And the very first one listed is that healthy bodies must be able to maintain homeostasis. So what is homeostasis? It's the body's ability to maintain a stable internal environment. Or another way of saying it is, it's the body's ability to maintain a dynamic state of equilibrium. Here's what that means. It's okay for things to shift around a little bit. Like if you're talking about your body temperature, for example, you can have a slightly higher temperature at some times and a slightly lower temperature at other times. But you must be within a state of equilibrium. And so if your temperature goes up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then you have to bring it back down to, something more normal like 98 or 99 degrees. So that's what we mean when we say that you are maintaining a dynamic state of equilibrium. Homeostasis must be maintained for normal body functioning and for sustaining life. So when your needs are being adequately met, your body functions smoothly, which means you're in homeostasis. Basically, you don't have to think about your body. You're not thinking about whether this hurts or that hurts because nothing hurts. You're feeling pretty good. And all organ systems work together to maintain homeostasis. Now, the body, to maintain homeostasis, does have to communicate chiefly through the nervous and the endocrine systems, where the nervous system is going to use electrical signals delivered by nerves. So here you can see your nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, and all of your nerves. And this allows the brain to communicate with all of the body, and it allows all of the body to communicate with the brain. Similarly, you can see that you have the endocrine system shown here, where you have all of these glands here and down there. And these glands use hormones that go through the blood to communicate from one part of your body to another and from those parts of the body to the brain and back again. And so because of this tight communication, that allows everything to be coordinated so that everything is running smoothly. That means that if you have something that's out of whack, we're going to call that the variable, by the way. So it could be temperature, it could be blood sugar, but if there's something that's out of whack, then your brain and your hormones and your blood and all the parts of your body have to communicate to get that variable back to its state of equilibrium. So when we talk about homeostasis, these are the events that happen um, that allow you to maintain homeostasis when the variable gets imbalanced. And these are the three parts of every homeostatic system that allows you to get the variable back into homeostasis. So we're going to go through all of these, and we're going to use blood pressure as an example. Let's start with the stimulus. Now the stimulus is going to be something, could be internal or external, but it's often external. It's going to be something that produces a change in the variable. So for example, your blood pressure goes up. Why did your blood pressure go up? I don't know, maybe you were really stressed out because you have a big test next period, or maybe you've just been eating a lot of potato chips late at night, who knows? But your blood pressure goes up. So if you have a lot of blood pressure, like a really high blood pressure, your body is going to detect that. Here's how detection happens. In this particular case, too much blood is going to fill your heart. So high blood pressure means you have a high volume of blood that your heart has to pump through your whole body. And so when you're overfilling the heart, then that stretches the walls of the heart. And that stretch is going to be detected by a receptor or by a sensor. So what's the receptor in this case? It's going to be heart stretch receptors. So they're going to be specialized cells in the walls of your heart that when the heart muscle stretches to accommodate the extra blood, these receptors will detect that extra stretch, and then they'll send information that your heart is, stretching to the control center. And that's called the input, where the information is sent along the afferent pathway. And we'll discuss what that word means later. But in this case, what's the input? Your heart stretch receptors are sending information to your brain from here to here. And guess what? Your brain is indeed the control center. And your brain's job is to, well, in this case, it's the brainstem. The brainstem is the particular part of the brain that's going to be receiving this information. And your brainstem's job is to integrate the information, meaning your brain, or in this case, your brainstem, has to determine what's the problem and what needs to be done to correct the problem. So in this case, your brainstem, which is the colored portion shown here deep in the interior of the brain and coming out from the base of the brain, your brainstem is determining that your blood pressure is too high. It got the input from the heart stretch receptors, and it's integrated the information, and it's realized your blood pressure is too high. And so now your brainstem has to produce an output. So output is the information that's sent along the efferent pathway that will activate the effector. In other words, it's a command. What is your brain telling your body to do? And so your output in this particular case is going to be a command that your brain is going to send to your kidneys, among other things. So when it comes to regulating blood pressure, your brain is going to have multiple commands going out to multiple different body parts. And one of those body parts is going to be the kidneys. Here's your left kidney, here's your right kidney. They're super happy to be of service. And the kidneys are the effectors in this case. They are the parts of the body that are responding to commands from the brain. Okay, so what is that response going to be? Well, whatever the response is, it's going to be something that the effector is going to do that will feed back to influence the magnitude of the stimulus and return the variable to homeostasis. In other words, the response is going to be something that will fix the problem. So in this particular case, your problem was you have too much blood. And so the response will be the kidneys will filter more water out of your blood. Because if you have too much blood, the quick and easy way to fix it is to reduce the blood volume by removing water from the blood. That will mean you will have less blood and your blood pressure will go down. In addition to that, so this response here is going to produce this effect, and it's also going to produce other effects as well. Like the kidneys will have to, since they removed more water, now they're making more urine. And so the kidneys are going to have to send more urine to your bladder, and then your bladder is going to fill, which will stretch its walls. And then that signal from the bladder is going to become a stimulus that will be detected by bladder stretch receptors, which will send information to the brain, and then the brain is going to send an output back to the bladder, and then that's going to tell you that you really, really, really have to go use the bathroom now. And then so you rush to the bathroom and you pee, and your bladder relieves itself. And that's how you're going to get that variable back in homeostasis, right? We started with high blood pressure. And so when the blood filled the heart and the heart wall stretched, those heart stretch receptors then sent input to the brainstem, which integrated the information and determined what output or what commands to send out to the effectors. And then those effectors then produced the correct response to bring your blood pressure down. And now your blood pressure is back in homeostasis. Okay. So let's just show all the vocabulary that was associated with that. And I know it was a lot. But all homeostatic control mechanisms have at least 3 components, meaning 3 physical parts. There's a receptor that will respond to changes in the environment, which are also known as stimuli. and they'll send that information to control centers via the afferent pathways. Afferent means that it's in the direction that approaches the control center. So an afferent pathway is an information pathway that goes up to the brain. Here, this little icon here is meant to represent some receptor in your body that is able to perfectly match to some stimulus, and that receptor received the information from the stimulus and is going to send it to the control center. So your control center is almost always going to be your brain in terms of what you're learning for this class. And your control center determines the set point at which the variable should be maintained. In other words, what temperature should you maintain your body at? What blood pressure should you maintain your body at? How much blood sugar should you have in order to be healthy? So what is that set point? The control center will analyze information that came from your receptors up that afferent pathway, and that's going to allow your control center, your brain, to determine the appropriate response. So now your brain is going to send information or a command to the effector to make the effector actually carry out the appropriate response. So the effector is going to be usually your muscles for this class. Sometimes it might be glands, but for this anatomy physiology class as a high school introductory course, it's almost always going to be some sort of muscle. And so what does the effector do? What does the muscle do? Well, it provides a means for response to the stimulus. It actually allows the control center to produce a response that then will return the variable back to its set point. And that command is going to flow along the efferent pathway. You'll notice that the word efferent looks just like the word afferent, and the only difference is the prefix. A or ad is Latin for to or towards, and e or ex is Latin for away or out of. And so the way, one mnemonic to remember that is the efferent information will exit the control center, so we'll go out from the brain down to the effectors, versus an afferent pathway approaches the control center. So we'll go up from the receptors, wherever they are, up to the brain. So afferent goes up to the brain, efferent goes out of the brain. Afferent approaches, exit, or efferent exits. So here are the events of the homeostatic pathway, where if you have some disturbance in homeostasis, then you're going to have this chain reaction of events. First, there's going to be a stimulus that produces a change in the variable, something that might cause your blood pressure to shoot up. Then you have detection. The change is going to be detected by a receptor, which is what we were just talking about over here. So that's the actual physical part of your body that will detect the change. And then that receptor will send input to the control center, and then the control center will integrate that information, meaning it will send that information to other appropriate places in the brain and determine what action or response should be taken. Then it will send an output or a command to the effector, and then last of all, the effector will carry out the response. I am so sorry about this navigation bar that's blocking the bottom of the slide, but the response is going to be something the effector does to return the variable to homeostasis. And so these three words here, receptor, control center, and effector, those are the physical parts that you must have to maintain homeostasis, and these things here are the actual events that happen during a homeostatic loop. I forgot about my little icons. Okay, stimulus, like when the doctor hits your patellar tendon with a Rowan mallet. Detection, that's going to cause the tendon to stretch, which will then send input to the control center, which will then send output to the muscles and then that's going to cause your knee to kick out, and that's called the patellar or the knee jerk reflex. All right, I want you to just check and see, is this something that you understand? And one way you can do that is pause the video here and just see if you can walk yourself through all of the steps of the homeostatic loop if the stimulus was that the weather is too hot or the weather is too cold. So let's say that you're out in the hot sun and your body temperature is going up, and that's the stimulus. How would your body bring your temperature back down? What do you think the response would be at the end? Or alternatively, you could consider, like, what if you're out in the snow or something and you're not wearing warm enough clothing? What would be the response that you would get, and how would your body get there? And if you can answer this question for either of these scenarios using all of the vocabulary here, then you've probably mastered this topic. And when you're ready, you can resume the video. Okay, so the end result is going to be that you're going to reduce the stimulus, or you're going to just shut off the original stimulus entirely. And when that happens, we call that negative feedback. And so homeostatic control mechanisms, homeostatic control mechanisms are negative feedback mechanisms, which means that they receive information and they negatively impact the original stimulus that triggered all of this to happen. They shut off the original stimulus, they reduce its intensity, and one analogy that might help you understand this is a household heating system. Let's say that you set the thermostat for your house to 72 degrees Fahrenheit because that's what makes you feel comfortable. If your temperature in your house gets too hot, then what's going to happen is, here's the temperature of the room, it goes up. That rise in temperature is going to be detected by your thermostat, which will then turn on a signal that will go to your heater to turn it off. So now the heater will be shut down if the temperature in your house goes up. Some of you may have air conditioning units, in which case a signal would also go to your air conditioning to turn that on. Either way, though, the end result is your air conditioning unit would then respond by producing cold air, or your heater would respond by no longer producing warm air. And then that would cause the temperature of the room to drop, which would then return your house temperature to the set point of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. So remember, homeostasis is a negative feedback mechanism where you are reducing or bringing down the level of the stimulus. What is the thermostat for your body? It's your hypothalamus. So here you guys can see the hypothalamus is this colored green region. It's not green in real life, but it's this little colored region here that you'll find deep, 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 deep in the center of your brain, and it regulates body temperature. So how does this work if the temperature is too hot or if the temperature is too cold? Okay, well, let's start with if it's too hot. The stimulus is your body temperature went up because you are out in 90-degree heat or something and you've been running around. That heat is going to be detected by thermoreceptors in your skin and probably in other places too. So special receptors in your skin that sense when temperature is going up. And so then those receptors will send input up afferent pathways to the hypothalamus in your brain, which would then send output to the sweat glands in your skin. And your sweat glands would be the effectors. So those commands from the hypothalamus would go down the efferent pathways to your sweat glands in your skin, which then triggers them to produce sweat. So then when you sweat, the water is going to come onto the surface of your skin and it will evaporate, and as it evaporates, it removes heat from your body, which then returns your body back to around 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Alternatively, let's say the stimulus is you're too cold. So that's the stimulus, your body temperature drops, the change will be detected by thermoreceptors in your skin and other places. Those skin receptors will then send input up afferent pathways to your hypothalamus, which will then send output commands down efferent pathways to the little like muscles in your skin or under your skin that will cause them to contract very rapidly and repeatedly, which is called shivering. And so the shivering will generate heat because anytime you contract your muscles vigorously, you're generating heat. That's why you get so hot when you exercise. So that's going to generate heat, which will then raise your body temperature and bring you back to 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, sometimes you actually don't want to maintain homeostasis. There are times, very, very few examples of these, but there are times where your body actually needs to move away from homeostasis. And when that happens, if the body is actually trying to increase the reaction to the stimulus, we call that positive feedback. So positive feedback is when you increase the original stimulus to push the variable even farther away from its set point. In other words, we're raising or increasing the response to the stimulus. And here are 4 examples that you should know of: blood clotting, the birth of a baby, breastfeeding, labor contractions, and protein digestion. So let's watch this little clip. Here you have a tear in your blood vessel. Like, I don't know, you cut your finger or something, and now you're bleeding, and there's a rip in your blood vessel. So what's going to happen is you have these cells that will produce these proteins. You can see these proteins here, you can see those proteins there. And when they dock together as a result of this cut, they're going to cause these cells to transform into activated platelets. So this platelet will now dock with the next platelet that comes along. And when these 2 platelets connect to each other and dock together like that, that's going to then trigger the next platelet to activate and change shape. And then that's going to recruit even more platelets to come. And then they all start to clump together. And so what's happening in this case is these activated platelets are producing proteins that are then going to trigger even more platelets to join with them so that they bond together and they form this clump of activated platelets that as it grows, it's going to start to plug up that tear in your blood vessel. At the same time, these platelets are also going to produce other additional molecules like that blue one that you saw that are going to trigger even more platelets to come, as well as they'll trigger them to start forming little fibrin molecules. So that's these yellow stringy things that you see forming here. And then those molecules, those stringy molecules, then start to attract red blood cells, as well as they start to capture other stuff that normally would escape out the clot. But instead, what's happening is they're forming a mesh that then causes that clot, that tear to be plugged up. Do you need to know the names of any of these things that I just mentioned? Not right now, no. We will learn about them in a future unit, though. But the point is, in this case, you started with one cell, and then what you ended up with is an increasing number of cells that they just kept clumping and clumping and more and more and more. So this is a positive feedback response where they're increasing the response to then cause the plug to form faster to reduce your bleeding even faster. Another example is labor contractions. So when a baby is so big that its continued presence in the mother's womb will actually endanger both the baby and the mother, then what's going to happen is the brain, the baby is going to produce signals that will reach the mother's brain that will stimulate the mother's pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called oxytocin. Do you need to know these words? No, not right now. We're going to learn some of them in the future. But you're going to secrete hormones that will then induce contractions in the uterine muscle. And then that's going to trigger the release of other chemicals that will trigger the release of even more of those hormones, that will then trigger the brain to release even more of those hormones, that will then stimulate even more contractions. And so it's this cycle that keeps going and going. The contractions get stronger and they get closer together. And the only way to stop it is for the baby to actually leave the mother's womb. Another example of that is breastfeeding. So you should not be producing breast milk unless you're actually trying to feed a baby. But when the baby starts suckling at the mother's breast, that's going to trigger the mother's breast tissue to produce milk. And then as milk gets produced and removed by the suckling motion, that's going to trigger even more breast milk to get produced. As the baby grows larger, it's going to suckle more and more and more. And so that's going to trigger more and more and more milk production until the only way to stop it is for the baby to just simply stop suckling. And when that happens, that's called weaning, right around like 6 to 12 months as the baby starts to eat real foods. And then one last example is in your stomach. Your stomach has to break down proteins that you eat, but proteins are really hard to break down, and you have to do it quickly in order to have efficient digestion. And so the stomach walls are going to release a juice called gastrin, and then as the gastrin breaks down the proteins in the food that you ate, that will trigger even more gastrin to be produced. And then as the protein breaks down more, that will trigger even more gastrin to be produced until eventually the proteins are all broken up and you don't need any more gastrin. And as they leave the stomach and go into the small intestine here, then that's going to shut off gastrin production. Okay, last of all, let's talk about what happens when you are not in homeostasis. If your body is not able to maintain homeostasis, you're going to be in pain, you're definitely going to feel it, and if you cannot get back into homeostasis, and this just keeps happening, then we call that a disease. The thing about that is as you age, your body organs will become less efficient, and your internal conditions will become less stable. The older you get, the harder it is to maintain homeostasis. And so that's going to put us at increased risk of illness, and it's going to produce other changes that become visible and noticeable as you age. One example of that is the breakdown of elastin. So elastin is a protein that you'll find under your skin. And this is the protein that allows your skin to snap back when it gets deformed. So if you pull on your skin, it snaps back, it's bouncy, it's springy. But as you age, you're no longer able to maintain a homeostatic amount of elastin under your skin. And so the elastin breaks down and is not replaced. And so that allows these wrinkles to form in your skin, and your skin loses its stretch. Okay, you guys, here are your key takeaways. First, you need to know maintaining homeostasis is a vital life function, and that means that you must be able to maintain a stable internal environment. Second, you must know that homeostasis is a negative feedback mechanism that returns a variable to its set point. When that happens, the control center will integrate the afferent or sensory input to determine the appropriate efferent or motor output that will enable the effector to counteract the initial stimulus and bring your variable back to what's normal. In special cases, however, positive feedback moves the system away from homeostasis, and that's on purpose for special conditions like if you get cut or if you are giving birth to a baby. When homeostasis is not maintained, the variable continues to move farther and farther away from its set point, which means organ systems become less efficient at carrying out their life functions. That leads to disease, and this is inevitable as we age. I know this was a really long lecture. They're not all going to be this long, And what I'd like you to do is before you shut this off, just go back to the initial question, the essential question here. Pause the video. See if you can answer this question using all of the vocabulary on the right, and if you can, you have mastered this topic.